Alright, so now let's talk about the most Spielberg-y of all of Spielberg's filmography. E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial. Now, E.T. came out in 1982, was directed by Steven Spielberg, and is, according to Spielberg, the most personal film he's ever made up until that point. And I think it actually still might be the most personal film he ever made, because in some ways E.T. is the type of movie that kind of reflects how Spielberg felt as a kid. He experienced his parents' divorce at a very young age. His home life wasn't the best place to grow up, and I think he would have appreciated a little alien friend to help him and his siblings work through all the trials and tribulations of divorce in middle-class suburbia. And E.T. is an interesting choice to be coming out around this time, because at the same time they were filming this, Poltergeist was also being filmed, which he produced and definitely did not have a hand in directing at all. I think it's clear that Spielberg had this kind of Norman Rockwell middle-class suburbia environment on his mind, because E.T. and Poltergeist both center around families struggling in suburbia. And in E.T. it's more of a sci-fi bent, and Poltergeist it's a more horror haunting bent. But when you look deeper about the themes of each movie, there's a lot of overlap between these two movies, and it really does make me think that Spielberg had a much more direct hand in Poltergeist than he's willing to admit. But I think it's also interesting looking at this as kind of a pseudo-sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because Close Encounters was an alien encounter movie, but it was told from the point of view of adults. Richard Dreyfuss's character is a father. He has this experience and he goes and pursues that. And Spielberg said in interviews that the idea for E.T. did stem from making Close Encounters, because he thought about what if one of the aliens got left behind and then had an experience with a kid and they kind of became friends. Where would that story go? And then he combined that idea with the story he's kind of kicking around about a divorced family and struggles with kids in suburbia, and he just slapped them together. And now we've got E.T. And E.T. is one of those quintessential movies that I think every kid or early teenager should watch, because it just speaks to that inner child in all of us. And a lot of that credit has to go to the child actors in this movie. You've got Henry Thomas as Elliot, you've got Robert McNaughton as Michael, his older brother, and you've got a very, very young Drew Barrymore as Gertie. And it's kind of amazing how much Drew Barrymore still looks like herself, both in appearance and voice. It's actually kind of creepy how when you go back and watch this movie, she is so young, but you do still recognize her. And what makes these kids work is that they act like real kids. They're kind of bratty, they curse. Well, they curse about as much as a 80s PG movie will allow, but even still, compared to a lot of the Disney and Nickelodeon shows that are out there, this is definitely more realistic to how children talk to each other, and that really elevates this movie, and it makes it kind of timeless and relatable, and just pulls at the heartstrings of when you were a kid and you remember how you used to talk. And that's really what makes this movie work, because it's believable, it's plausible. Even though it is in this kind of heightened reality of aliens and science fiction, it's so grounded in very believable and authentic performances from these kids. And if that element failed, you wouldn't buy it, especially with Henry Thomas's Elliot, because you have to believe that this kid has actually made an emotional connection with this alien. And let's talk about the alien for a minute. So the alien E.T., he doesn't actually get like a proper name. They just call him E.T., which just stands for extraterrestrial, so I don't even know if that really counts. But E.T. was brought to life through the special effects wizards over at ILM, George Lucas's company that he just lets his friends use from time to time. And it really is crazy just the range of emotion that this creature can express. But I would argue all that really doesn't matter unless you believe that Elliot believes that this thing is real. And he does. It's a very convincing performance, and it's heartbreaking when you get to the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, when E.T. is dying and they're both sick and they're both crying. And this actually brings me to the reason why I didn't like E.T. when I was a kid. Because I saw it, I was very young, and in the beginning of the movie I was having a great time. I liked the atmosphere, I liked the characters, I liked the Reese's Pieces, but when it came to the part where E.T. gets sick and you think he's gonna die, that was it for me. I didn't like the movie after that. And I remember specifically the shot that just turned me off from this movie. And it's when Michael finds E.T. by the side of this river on these rocks, and he's all pale and not moving, and I was convinced. I was like, he's dead. There's no coming back from this. It's dead. It's too late. E.T.'s gone. I don't want to see the rest of this movie. It's too sad, too dark, too miserable. Why did you put me through this? And I have a feeling I'm not the only person that's had that reaction, because I've talked to people my age or a little younger, and they were exposed to E.T. at a young age. Their parents were like, oh, it's a classic. It's for kids. It's great. And they get to that part and they just don't like the movie anymore. They think it's just too dark, too miserable. I think that is why E.T. right now isn't really the cultural touchstone film that it used to be in like the 80s and 90s, because that movie was such a hit that Universal Studios made a ride dedicated to it when it opened. That was how popular and big this movie was with kids and teenagers. And now we're getting to the point where that ride, it's kind of up in the air how much longer it's going to be open for, because for whatever reason E.T. just isn't resonating with the kids of today. And I think that's actually very sad, because E.T. is a fantastic movie, and even though I didn't really get it when I was a little kid, the more I've seen it, every time I watch it, the more I like it, and the more I understand the story Spielberg is trying to tell. And really the story he's telling is the 80s sci-fi version of Mary Poppins. Yes, Mary Poppins, probably one of the most profitable and successful Disney movies ever made. It's a fantastic film. I have a whole video gushing about how much I love that movie and how great it is. Because what Mary Poppins is, in essence, is a story about a dysfunctional family and gets visited by some magical, otherworldly being, and then through a series of adventures they get their eyes opened and the family becomes stronger and more unified as a whole at the end. But of course when that happens, it means that that creature needs to leave, and so they say their goodbyes, but it is all for the best because now the family is better. And that's also the story of E.T. E.T. is this otherworldly being that comes down and meets this family who's all sorts of dysfunctional, and by the end of the movie the family is stronger and E.T. has to go back to his people. And they say their goodbyes, and it's very emotional, very sad, but all the while I couldn't help but think about how similar it is in essence to Mary Poppins. And Mary Poppins is by no means the originator of this type of story. It's been going on long before and long after. The Iron Giant is another perfect example of this type of story. But what I love about E.T. specifically is the style of it, because this is by far the most Spielberg movie he's ever made, because it has all of his directorial hallmarks, and some of them have kind of already been established in his earlier movies, like his infatuation with spotlights, because this movie opens, closes, and throughout the whole movie has so many examples of spotlights or headlights or flashlights or just some kind of light shining into the camera through a thick haze or fog. That's something that probably got started in Jaws, was definitely in Close Encounters, and it is on full blast here. And as fun as it is to kind of make fun of it and just to see how overdone it can be in this movie, I can't deny that it looks cool. And as a fan of film noir, I do appreciate how it harkens back to the style of detective movies in the 30s and 40s. And when it's used with the government agents that are trying to take E.T. away or find him or figure out what happened at this crash site, it does add a little extra level of menace to their presence, where it's just not a bunch of adults walking around. They're only shot from like the waist down from a kid's perspective, which is genius, but also having them engulfed in this thick fog and these lights shining in all directions, it's just really effective in establishing your villain. But also this movie introduces tropes that Spielberg would incorporate in many, many more of his movies, such as focusing on the kids' side of the story. This is something that'll pop up again and again in his career. For some reason, he really likes telling stories from the kids' point of view, because kids generally are more innocent and optimistic, and you get a lot of that Spielberg whimsy and wide-eyed innocence that he's known for. And it all starts really here. You get a little bit of that in Close Encounters as far as the whimsy goes, but even that has more of an adult intellectual edge, whereas this is entirely emotional. But I cannot go any further in this review without mentioning the incredible score made by John Williams, which of course it's John Williams. John Williams and Spielberg are like bacon and eggs at this point. And even though this is their fourth or fifth collaboration together and their second sci-fi collaboration, John Williams delivers an original score that hits exactly the beats that it needs to hit. It hits the whimsy, it hits the otherworldly adventure side, it hits the sci-fi angle, and it doesn't feel at all like he's copying his previous work on Close Encounters or Star Wars. And yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on E.T. It's not a film that I have that much nostalgic attachment to, But it is a movie that the more I watch it, whenever I'm in the mood for a Spielberg marathon, I watch a bunch of his old movies. E.T. is always on that list, and I watch it, and every time I just appreciate more and more the craft and care that he put into this movie. You can tell that this is Spielberg's heart on display, and he delivered on a phenomenal family film that resonates for both kids and adults. That's actually very hard to accomplish. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about E.T.? Did you watch it as a kid? Were you freaked out by it? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.